Hello. I wanted to say how honored I am to be talking with you today. I'm incredibly inspired by mining innovation, Minovisión. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but I think that was pretty good. And I'm also really inspired by how much this group has been touched by the power of story. So I wanted to dive into that content just a little bit more and give you more insight onto why I think it's so important, and hopefully be able to ask you a few questions along the way that I'd love you to answer. And so sometimes I'm going to pose a question and then you're going to write down the answer. And if you're willing to share any of your answers or have any questions that might follow this talk, please feel free to reach out to me directly at jaker@stanford.edu or reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. All right, so first I want to welcome you. I want to start by saying that I have never liked story. I was trained at Stanford to be a quantitative researcher. And as you develop theories and hypotheses and you test them in empirical papers, you basically are trained to disregard story. Like someone shares a story with you and you will, by definition, immediately forget it. So I feel like from a memory perspective, I never coded stories. I never told stories. I was really trained to get large data sets and test our hypotheses with those large data sets. So it's quite ironic that I'm here today talking about the neuroscience, the social psychological meaning, and the cultural meaning of stories. So why am I here talking about this? It's partly because this topic has really personally changed my life, so much so that I have delved into the behavioral science of story. It really starts a long time ago. I grew up hearing stories around the dinner table of people dying. My mom has volunteered at hospice for as long as I can remember. And so my two sisters and I, we would hear these stories about what people wished for in their last days of life. We're what you call a really fun family. And I remember my mom sharing, because, as a hospice volunteer, her job is to, it's to fulfill those wishes in the last days of life. And she would share what people wished for. And there's really, 5 things that bubbled up again and again. The first was people often said they wished they were more bold, that they lived more fearlessly. And fearlessly wasn't about not having fear. It was just being open to change, open to travel, open to adventure, open to leaving jobs and going to build a new career elsewhere. A second regret people mentioned was that they wish they had lived in more authentic ways, that they hadn't listened so hard to others, their parents, society, others, that they were more willing to have this kind of authentic way of living. They wish they savored more, that they were just present in the moment. And they really appreciated these small things in life. And they wish they didn't take themselves so seriously. And remember, this is on the most meaningful, most serious part of their life. They regretted not allowing themselves to be happy, not laughing more, feeling joy. And then the last and maybe most important thing is that they said, I wish I had the chance to say, I love you one more time. And all of these things, boldness, authenticity, presence, joy, and love, made me start thinking as an academic, why is it that people have regrets at the end of their life? What is it that we're doing in the day-to-day that makes us often go off track? And I think one of the answers to that question is a lot of us are designed to try and be happy, to try and maximize happiness. And that's somehow a definition of a good life, a successful life. But in fact, meaning, which is very different than happiness, is oftentimes what creates lasting happiness. Meaning versus happiness is doing things that are much more lasting, not just flippant and flash in the pants. And they're about, highs and lows, not just maximizing positive experiences, but also having lows and understanding that defines life too. It's about others and those social connections and saying, I love you, not just about self. And so if we live a life of meaning, the contention is we would have fewer regrets when we die. And that's easier said than done. But where does meaning exist? Meaning exists in our stories. Stories capture, communicate, and are co-created with others to create meaning. And so if you go into your life and your work with this idea of what's the story, or how many stories could come out of this adventure, that might actually be a better way of living life. So that's one of the many reasons why I find this topic to be so fascinating. I also think that, deeply speaking, this topic allows you to have a more meaningful life, not just have assets for your company or your business. You can, in fact, argue that life is only our remembered stories. All right, so I teach in the business school, as you know, and story is a topic that has great importance for business as well as life. One of the favorite quotes I have is by Ben Horowitz, who's a venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road. And he says, the company story is the company's strategy. The story must explain why you exist. Why are we doing this? Why should you join the company? Why should you invest in us? He says, I emphasize to CEOs, you have to have a story in the minds of employees. It's hard to memorize objectives, but it's easy to remember a story. The reason is because you, as leaders, spend every day talking about the what needs to be done, what has been done, but often the why can be forgotten. And that's where story comes in. I have a friend, he's the CEO of Zoom, Eric Yuan. And I was talking with him about, earlier this year, about the origins of Zoom. And he shares a story where he was a freshman at Shandong University in science technology. And he had a long distance relationship, which sparked a new idea. His girlfriend was attending a university in another city, and it took 10 hours and multiple train rides to get to and from Shandong. And on his train rides, Eric would dream of a device in the future that he could use to see and talk to his girlfriend with just one click. Well, fast forward a decade, and his story has a happy ending. He went on to marry that girlfriend and build that device that enabled human connection with just one click. And he created a solution for video conferencing that was delightful and simple to use, so that people like his freshman self could effortlessly stay connected to their loved ones and colleagues alike. This love story helped define Zoom. It served as an anchor for his entire team. It helped him articulate a vision for the company in a meaningful, memorable, and relatable way. By focusing on trust and humor and love, these three tenets of human connection, as features of both the company culture as well as the product they make, Eric and his team built this technology that is used from everything from company board meetings to first dates and even weddings. Just in the last 8 months of the COVID pandemic, Zoom has grown 45% in market share, increased from 10 to 300 million of daily Zoom meeting participants, and its projected revenue for next year is over 3 billion. Stories do the same thing. They help us, just like with Eric's story, they help us connect not just to friends and family, but to others, to teams, to employers, to partners in a much more meaningful way. So understanding the power of story will help you become a more effective, authentic leader, build empathy, and grow your company. But story has even a greater superpower. The behavioral insights that I just shared suggest that you'll live a more meaningful life just by understanding the science of story and how to cultivate it. That's right, people, you're going to have a more meaningful life. This is the best hour ever. All right, so our objectives is to help continue developing the ability to tell meaningful stories, to identify these signature stories, leveraging humor as a secret weapon, and then harnessing stories to move people to action. So what I wanted to do is start with why story. First, there's these global trends that we are all feeling. We're living in a moment in time where what does it mean to be human is actually a question we're all implicitly or explicitly grappling with. And there's significant reasons why we're grappling with this question of what does it mean to be human and how do we lead in this environment. Digital transformation is fueling massive change, and that instability breeds fear and uncertainty. Automation is making our human qualities all the more important, as job displacement actually shifts the role of humans relative to AI. This understanding of where value comes from is also being contemplated. And trust is at an all-time low in our businesses, in our institutions, and in our leaders. So let me just share one dramatic statistic. There is a recent large-scale study that asked, where employees were asked, would you rather trust a stranger or your boss? 58% of people said they would rather trust a stranger than their boss. And 45% of employees say lack of trust in leadership is the biggest issue in work performance right now. We are all living during a time when people want and expect their leaders to be more human, less perfect, and at times a little bit vulnerable, regardless of hierarchy and rank. So, how do you lead in this environment? And I would argue story. Story is what captures, creates, and communicates humanity and meaning. A few of my favorite quotes. Richard Branson says, sharing a story is one of the best ways we have of coming up with new ideas, and listening to a story is one of the best ways of learning about each other in the world. Stories make us human. A second favorite quote. Satya Nadella says, empathy, which is the way of listening to other stories, is only developed through stories that define yours and others' life experience. It's not something that really is endowed on you. Empathy can make you, though, a more effective parent, colleague, and partner. And last, General Stanley McChrystal says, story, or the why you're doing what you're doing, acts as the ultimate heuristic for rapid decision-making. Stories provide a sense of purpose, giving leaders and teams the ability to do the right thing and also to know what the right thing is. Now, purpose is really particularly important when systems are being dismantled and when confusion reigns and trust is low. So that why we're doing what we're doing is particularly important at this very moment. When things are changing, the why provides clarity, a light in the fog. So one thing I wanted to do is share with you the simple idea that when you align what is personally meaningful to you with what creates meaning within your corporation or purpose within your corporation, that's where things really change. So we're going to talk a little bit about the data and the cases that actually give rise to that phenomenon. But first, before I do, let me share a definition of story. A story is a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has arcs marked by these highs and lows. So it's not just a to-do list or a set of data. It's not just like features of a product. It's a narrative. And so when you're sharing the story, you know, you're taking people on the roller coaster of these ups and downs. And the stories work because as you share a story, even that story I shared earlier about sitting around the dinner table with my mom sharing stories about people dying, even that has moments of highs and lows and, you know, confusion and insight. But these personal stories work because they're emotional, they're evocative, and they engage more of the brain and therefore are better remembered than simply stating facts. We're neurologically wired to understand stories. because the audience fills in the gaps. But there are important misperceptions of story. Some of them you know already, and you've thought about them, but I wanted to share a few of them, and I want to go deep on the third. The first, the role of story in data. Most people feel that, story is this empty thing and data is hard and real and true. Well, now we know that data also can be, misinformation. It can be not necessarily factual. And stories, personal stories, are oftentimes more true than just the hard data that you see. But the more important thing is that you have all of your stories, your employee stories, your partner stories, your customer stories, your stories, and then you have this data, competitive data, brand data, global data. And the question is, in whatever context you find yourself, what data will you share? What stories will you share? And how much will you lean into one versus the other? And when story is shared first, when people usually start to engage with you at a deeper level, both hemispheres process that story, and the audience is actively making inferences of meaning from that story. When you're given just data, your brain doesn't process that information as deeply, as holistically as it does with story. So think about context that you might find yourself in. Contexts which have to do with, innovation or growth or changing the business model of your company, or client sessions, or collaborating with partners. In each of these different contexts, different stories will matter and move the audience ahead, and different data will matter. So think, what is the right story? What is the right data? And do you lean into the story, or do you lean into the data? And when you share stories first and then go into data, that is sort of a secret weapon that allows the audience to be much more engaged. So I encourage you to write down, to just take 5 seconds right now and just kind of write down the contexts that are coming up for you in the next week or quarter or year. What are the most important events, be they personal or business oriented, and write down each of those events, and then start to brainstorm what stories and what data would be important in each of those. All right, second, ROI on data. Most people believe that you can't really measure the return on investment in a story. But Bonobos, which is an online American company that sells men's clothing, actually born out of Stanford, they launched one of their brands, which was called Bull Denim, online. And it's a very data-oriented company. So they would know, based on data that they pulled in, where are the open spaces for new brands. Well, the data said that there was no brand that was really about comfortable travel-oriented jeans. So they built this product. It was a great product, but sales underperformed. They asked customers about what they loved about the jeans and learned that the men did love that they were comfy and wrinkle-proof and no hassle and perfect for travel. So the very few people who bought them said these stories. They kept hearing these stories about these crazy experiences in the world that these guys would have in these jeans. So they renamed it the travel jean, each style for a different destination, like mid-weight travel jeans. They're made of 9-ounce Italian cotton denim, ideal for excursions to temperate zones near and far. That's all they did. They just added, they changed the name, and then they just added a context. It's ideal for excursions near and far. And sales skyrocketed. After renaming the jeans and just including that one context that conjured up stories, category sales increased from 7 to 15% in 1 month alone. It's incredible. All right, the third is that story is long. Most people think that stories will take too long. I don't have time to share a story. But in fact, stories can be shared in 6 words or less. Ernest Hemingway was once known to have shared the first 6-word story. He wrote, "Baby shoes for sale, never worn." So I always ask my students, as you probably know, to share 6-word stories about themselves, like, not quite, aspiring to be quite. Tonight he packs, tomorrow I pine. Married the wrong girl, fixed it. getting old ringtones piss me off. So not all of these stories have to be serious. They're funny. And that brings me to my last misperception that I think is so incredibly important. People think that there's only one good type of story, that it's meaningful, that it's powerful, that it's serious. But in fact, the reality is that humor creates deeper and more meaningful connections, engagement, and sparks creativity. But here's the problem. We drop off a humor cliff around age 23. So this is based on global data collected by Gallup, 1.5 million people across different countries. And Gallup asked people the simple question, did you smile or laugh yesterday? And people say yes when they're 16, 18, and 20. When they start approaching 22, 23, 24, all of a sudden their answer is no. It's terrifying, by the way. It goes like this. And it doesn't get better until around 70, until they retire. So that's about 47 2 serious years. The average 4-year-old laughs 300 times in a single day. The average 40-year-old laughs just 4 times in a single day. So it takes 40-year-olds 2.5 months to laugh as much as a 4-year-old laughs in one day. Guys, let's stop getting beaten by 4-year-olds. All right, so why do we stop laughing? And why does humor and levity in stories, which makes us so much more human at a time where we really need it? Humor creates light when darkness exists. And we're living in dark times. So why do we stop using humor, and why do we stop smiling and laughing when we enter the workforce? There's 4 serious business myths. We call them deadly myths. The first is that, humor is the same thing as, basically is being funny. Like you have to be a stand-up and you have to use it. But in fact, humor is quite multidimensional. There's very different types of humor. It's not just all about being known as the funny person. Second, people believe that you're either born with it or you're not. But that's not true. People believe 4-year-olds are pretty funny. So are 16, 18, 20-year-olds. But we really stop using humor when we enter the workforce. Third, the serious business myth, that humor is the enemy of serious. And if we are here to work in serious ways, that humor and levity betray that goal. Not true. And fourth is the failure myth, that we worry that if we fail, that the risks of humor are just too great. But there's research to show that even if you use bad humor, just not inappropriate humor, people's impressions of you as confident and competent increase substantially. And again, it doesn't have to be good humor, just not inappropriate humor. The bar is that low in America, at least, and I think globally. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, this perception of humor style. So I invite you right now to go to humorseriously.com. I'm going to give you a second. This month, we came out with a book. It's on sale in the UK, but it's coming out in the US in February. And if anyone is interested in the book or would love to have me or Naomi talk at an organization, we'd be happy to do so. We're really excited about this book and bringing this body of work to life. So feel free to reach out. Now, when you go onto the humorseriously.com website, go to the quiz and you will take the quiz. It's like 3 minutes, the funnest quiz ever. And you will get a report that basically tells you your humor style. Let me describe the 4 styles to you now, just so you can start to hypothesize what you might be. And then you might be something different at work versus at home. All right, the first style is the stand-up. This is your classic funny person. They are unafraid to ruffle feathers. They don't shy away from dark humor. They come alive in front of crowds, so they tend to be pretty extroverted. They're comfortable cursing, and they'll make up humor on the fly. Then there's the sweetheart, and the humor for them flies under the radar. They lean optimistic and uplifting, and they're reluctant to hurt feelings, and so they keep their humor PG. They don't need to be in the limelight, and they often plan out their humor. Then there's the sniper. The sniper is sarcastic and edgy and dark, unafraid to cross a line to get a laugh. And the delivery is understated and they nail deadpan zingers and one-liners. It's hard for them oftentimes to laugh, so you have to earn their laughter. And then last, there's a magnet. Magnets are positive and warm and uplifting. They avoid controversial humor, and their delivery is animated and charismatic, and they can often nail impersonations and characters, and they laugh easily. Now, the reason this typology is so important is that when you are trying to be a leader that does garner trust, that can be agile, that empowers and inspires their teams, it's extraordinarily useful to have humor as a secret weapon. And in particular, having stories that evoke humor or evoke laughter, or even just being generous with your own laughter becomes extraordinarily useful. There is research to show that humor and humorous stories increases power. The perceptions of status increase by 37% if you use humor. And again, even if you use humor that's bad, just not inappropriate humor, perceptions of competence and confidence increases. It fuels optimism, giving you the confidence to take bigger and bolder risks. And it makes you more effective at achieving goals and diffusing tension. Second, it sparks creativity. It helps us tackle problems more creatively. So much of what you're doing is about innovation, about sparking creativity in teams. The use of humor to do that is extraordinary because it insulates teams from fear, which we all experience. And third and last is it builds bonds. Humor brings people along with you. It increases closeness and trust. In one study, researchers showed that employees who use humor authentically or even just laughed with others enjoy greater trust from their colleagues. What happens is when people laugh, our brains flood with oxytocin, or the trust hormone. And that means something right now when we have such a huge trust deficit. By the way, oxytocin is the same hormone that's released during childbirth as well as sex. So in other words, giving birth to a child, having sex, and laughing with a colleague over Zoom all have something in common. You're all laughing, oxytocin floods in, and no one's wearing pants. Thank you. I will be here all night. Did you guys like that one? You're welcome. There's one study which asked different couples, did you smile or no? It was half of the couples were asked, did you remember moments where you laughed with your partner? The other half of the couples were asked, remember moments where you were really happy together. The individuals in the first condition said later that they were 23% happier in their relationship than the individuals who just recalled a positive or happy moment. So what I encourage you to do is take some time out and over the next week, do a humor audit, which is the most fun audit ever. And all you do is you're going to write down how many times in a week that you laughed or you made someone else laugh. What were those moments? What were those stories? And at least it will start giving you a better sense of what, in fact, is your laughter style, frequency, and how much can you actually make others laugh. The more important thing is that you're realizing that humor is a choice, a filter through which to view the world. And our stories define us, but we get to pick the genre. A few quick tips on humor. First, truth lies at the heart of all humor. So whatever you see that's actually true, instead of asking yourself what is funny, just say what's true. What do you see happening? Two, all humor contains surprise and misdirection. So sometimes we think someone will zig and instead they eat a ham sandwich. Do you see that one coming? I think so. And then third, to craft humor, find the funny or mine your life for truth, and then exaggerate or compare or contrast. So just to kind of give you an example of comparing and contrasting, you might say, basically, sorry, I'm late, instead of, say like, my cat's organized a coup. So you're kind of zigging and zagging, but you're also contrasting and going in a different direction. Another example of the heart of comedy being truth, you might say, instead of saying, sorry, I'm late, the Zoom link didn't work, you might say, sorry, I'm late, I didn't want to come. Don't offend, but the idea is just having truth, and people understand that. So what are your signature stories now that you know these misperceptions? Most company stories are tactical, but signature stories are strategic. They're an asset to be managed. We define signature stories as intriguing, involving, authentic stories that drive change, which is what you're doing. And I'll talk briefly about three. One is story to lead. The other is story as to capture value, the customer stories. And the third is stories for growth. And they're all captured, really, really well in our class. But what's important is to think about, as you cultivate more leadership stories, remember, what are your stories with data? They're tools of power. And listening to other stories, and then leveraging humor or even just laughing generously are the things that are underrated. Also think about which audiences are most important to cultivate stories for: investors, employees, customers. All of those different audiences merit very different stories. One of my favorite stories is by the CEO of Dollar Shave Club, which is basically razors, a subscription-based razor. And if you Google Dollar Shave Club, you'll see, basically the story that he tells, because he's this charismatic, humorous kind of CEO. And that single story that he kind of unpacked on his website led to an enormous fueling of his business. After he launched with that $4,000 video that you can see if you Google it, he garnered 150 million in revenue 2 years later. And then 2 years after that, he sold to Unilever for $1 billion. And it was just really this story that he shared. So that's a great sort of leadership story. A second type of story we talk a lot about is these customer as hero stories. The customer as hero stories are important because by making others the hero of the story, they start to feel more connected to you, and your value is really captured. So think about the stories of your customers before they used you, and then after. What was the transformation by using your product, service, or company? And then remember, again, you can make different people the heroes. You can make customers the hero, clients the hero, employees the hero, or even investors the hero of their story. And what's powerful about this is that when you really anchor on others, not yourself, not only are you creating more meaning, but you're also making others feel valued. And that matters at a very important time of all of our lives where humans don't feel as valued often as they should. And third and last are these future or growth stories. They align the team and they fuel growth. So you have to know your purpose. Yeah, you have to understand how to make others feel valued, and you have to understand the inspired mission of the company. So I'm going to take you through a little story of Satya Nadella and Microsoft. Within the first year of Satya Nadella becoming CEO of Microsoft, he actually wrote a book called Hit Refresh, which is extraordinary. I really recommend you share it, because he faced, significant challenges for Microsoft, which was not, which just enormous business as well as brand challenges. And he started that first year with a very simple process. Know your purpose. Know why you exist, why Microsoft exists, and that's informed by stories. 2, build a shared understanding of purpose, how to make stories that illuminate purpose come to life. 3, cultivate pace. Pace is, are people feeling connected to a higher purpose? Do they feel that they can control their time? A is autonomy. Do they feel valued, and do they value their collaborations, other people they're working with? And E is excellence. Do they feel connected, like they're moving ahead or winning moving toward a North Star. And when you have all four of those acronyms, or that PACE acronym working for you, that's where you really get the unlock. And then you got to measure what matters. And for Satya, it was always about progress, not perfection. So in Hit Refresh, he talks a lot about these personal stories. Growing up in India, he played cricket, where there was joys and ups and downs and infinite possibilities as long as you prioritize the team. He tells stories about being married and having kids and the emotional journey that was for him. And these personal stories, which don't really have anything to do with Microsoft, are incredibly important because they prove out why empathy is so important to him. He also has leadership stories. So for example, succeeding at Microsoft, when he first became CEO, listen first, then communicate ambitious or bold goals. Second, he has stories around building the culture that drives employees' self-belief in growth mindset, not being the smartest in the world, but growth mindset. And then third, there was these customer stories. He really focused on from transactional to relational. And he turned competitors into problem-solving friends. And he proved out with customer stories the power of empathy to bond. And last were these future stories, or these growth stories. One of them was proving out stories about the story of Microsoft in our society, that Satya continues to live by his values, even in the face of tremendous change, to remain true to himself and the people he loves. But Microsoft has to continue to chase the cutting edge and transform itself. So machine learning makes humans more human. What does that look like for Microsoft? How do you empower every person on this planet to achieve more? And these things are actually what guides the growth of Microsoft. And his measure of success and purpose here is to improve each other's lives. And the measure of success, did I actually improve? Did I actually learn? Did I change each day? What's also fascinating about him is that, his ability to have a shared understanding of purpose. He argues with a quote, "I truly believe that each of us must find meaning in our work. The best work happens when it's not just work, but something that improves others' lives." And then he could cultivate pace, this idea again of you feel like you're part of something meaningful, you're in control of your own future path, autonomy, you feel part of a team, collaboration, and you feel like you have momentum working toward the goal of excellence. We have this one phrase, people want to be valued members of a winning team on an inspired mission. So if you feel valued, you've got that sense of autonomy. If you feel like you're a member of a team, you've got that collaboration. If you feel like you're winning, or what winning is, that's excellence. And then the inspired mission or purpose is in fact P. So for Satya, he believed his role as CEO is, there's something only a CEO uniquely can do, which is set the tone. And that captures the soul of a collective. How does he hire? People who put their team and purpose first, ahead of personal statistics and recognition. So what is purpose? For him, it's putting empathy at the center of everything, from products to new markets to employees, customers, and partners. Autonomy, it's all about individual empowerment. Make it happen. You have full autonomy. Collaboration, this is the collective opportunity to lead in transformation. And even the cricket story he shared really shows how important teams are. And then excellence. At Microsoft, we're aspiring to have a living, learning culture with a growth mindset that allows us to learn from ourselves and our customers. So good. They also have a story bank at Microsoft. And what this is a set of stories that are in a Excel spreadsheet that have themes, important themes of Microsoft, of Satya, that are told and retold in various ways. And you have to be highly consistent in telling a small set of stories as you are a leader. I often like to share the Salesforce example, where Salesforce found that features of Salesforce were mainstream, and that stories shared 10 years ago were stale. But 25% of most active sellers actually were actually driving growth for Salesforce. And what that meant was that Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, had to figure out what are these 25% most active sellers doing. Well, turns out they were sharing stories. They also had data, but they were sharing stories. So he went on a journey to really figure out how to story bid. What are these stories that are going to especially fuel growth? So he invited employees to submit stories up to 4 slides of customer journeys. And the first time he did it, 1,000 were submitted, 100 won. He invited all of them to produce a video with customers, and there was 10 winners. And those 10 stories were spotlighted internally and externally, and truly drove growth for Microsoft. I wanted to close with a final story and some insights of what I hope you do with us next. Nike Rise is a great case. It's a global case, and it's about basically basketball from Nike going into China. And so what was so fascinating about them is, when they were going to launch Nike Rise about 7 or so years ago in China, they had a question: how are we going to build a digital story with a modest media buy? We're not going to fly in athletes, but rather create hyper relevant content that gets organic interest and is designed for fans and players and partners. So first, same thing as what Satya did: know yourself. And this wasn't just like Phil Knight. This was knowing yourself from Nike's perspective. It means understanding your inspired mission and where you're going. So for Nike, it was, we're going to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And if you have a body, you're an athlete. So their key purpose is growing basketball, growing the game through progression. Second, know your customer. And so for them, they knew that they started doing kind of ethnographic research with kids in China, and they found quotes like, "I play ball, but I'm not a baller. I play for enjoyment, not competition. I want heroes I can relate to." So in China, 5-year-olds that showed promise in basketball were siphoned off into a whole other area, but there was this huge market of people that are regular people wanting to play ball. So to reveal Nike's insight, they needed something that was really fresh and actionable from these quotes. The insight represents an opportunity to solve for the customer, and it serves as the anchor for your growth story. So what they did was they moved from before sport is only for the elite to sport can be for everyone. And third, they built the future story. That was for them. We're going to prove to them the ability to rise in all of us. This is from the perspective of a Chinese kid. Prove to them, society, parents, whoever, the ability to rise is in all of us. Now that well-defined story gets stakeholders on the same page, enabling faster decision-making. And this is about finding your hyper-engaged fans and making them part of the story. And some of their stories will be humorous, and some will be real, and some will be poignant. The key is to collect these stories of these kids and remember that language matters. So Nike picked the ability to rise is in all of us is just an observation, but prove to them the ability to rise is in all of us. That's an active statement. And that was really important for Nike. Then what did they do? They then had an open casting call to millions. One question: tell us what you had to overcome to have basketball in your life. And everyone sent in 60-second videos and hashtag #Dashaminton. That was #Minton with a French accent. I apologize. I don't speak Chinese. I speak French. Anyway, the first time they did this, 3,712 videos were submitted, and they picked 30 kids from that set, those whose stories were compelling and moved and proved out the progression story. And they were all flown to Shanghai, and they stayed in the House of Mamba training with coaches. And then they selected 12 for the final basketball team or squad. And they had 3 live shows to compete to make the final squad. So kids were being spotlighted, not athletes. And this inspired and allowed integration of actual athletes who were so inspired by these kids. So LeBron and others would actually come to China, partly just to see the kids. And what was powerful is that they were able to design for partners because Nike and WeChat and Tencent, all of these different media partners really needed fresh, authentic, compelling, engaging stories. And when all stakeholders know the story and feel it, it grows. So they could really build for WeChat and Weibo and Youku and Tencent, all of these different media companies and platforms. What was amazing is that Nike Rise, they got 34% year-to-year sales increase on their shoes and other products after the launch of this campaign. And their tips for this digital story is that you have to have immersive, visual, fluid content delivered at the right time and the right moment. You need to have user-generated content where fans are the hero of the story, and it has to be authentic. All right, so last but not least, I wanted to end with what, again, I find to be so incredibly important. Not just about the power of story in general, but also ultimately why we're here on this planet. I mentioned to you in the outset that there's these 5 regrets that people mention, and that the last and most important one is love. I wish I had the chance to say I love you one more time is the most commonly mentioned regret people have. I think it might seem odd to talk about love in the context of business, but that's only because we hold so many misperceptions of what the word really means. We view love as scarce and rare, one that is devalued when expressed, but that's unfounded. Love is assumed to be romantic and sappy, at least in America, but love is much broader and more dimensional. We have love for our families, country, planet, and humanity. We think that love is just a sentiment, but it shows up in our actions every day when people feel seen and feel valued. And story is one of the most important ways people feel seen and valued. Love can be a reason to start your business, like with Eric Yon, and it can fuel your business. Love reminds us what it means to be human, and it reminds us that the role of even digital technology is to be more human too. In this moment of global crisis, considering the regrets of the dying and how we can craft lives with more meaning and purpose could not be more important. So my mom's stories and their scientific, spiritual, and practical implications have seeped into my life in unexpected ways. Perhaps most surprisingly, it's especially evident in the work that I do with leaders to help them redefine purpose and meaning in their organizations. But it also has so much to do with why I'm here with you today. Because my hope in cultivating stories with you and leveraging humor as a secret weapon especially is done not just with the hope that you will drive innovation, but that you will live life with fewer regrets. And I encourage you to think hard about a few things as I leave you. One, to be really an advocate for story, that you are a champion in your company of story, that you can be an ambassador and then build a team and create story habits. Just ask one story a day and then bank those stories, just like Microsoft does. Banking stories that are true and bold, distinct and authentic. They prove out presence, that have joy and humor, and most importantly, love. I encourage you to think also about your life. We need more leaders who bring more humanity to work. And when we have more boldness and authenticity and presence and joy and love, then that will seep into our business. I wanted to end with my final and favorite quote, which is, "Tell me the facts and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever." Thank you very much. I know this was a long time, but hopefully you found new stories, new data, and new ways of thinking about things that are actionable. If you did write down anything, Or if you took the humor quiz, please reach out. And if you sign your email with love, or it can even be XOXO, it could be even a smiley face, I don't care. You will get bonus credit. That's what you'll do. So feel free to reach out. It's Aaker, Aaker at stanford.edu. Thank you all so much. The end.